Hi, peeps. You're listening to She's My Cherry Pie, the baking podcast from the Cherry Bombe Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessie Sheehan. I'm a baker, recipe developer, and author of 4 baking books, including Salty, Cheesy, Herby, Crispy, Snackable Bakes. On each episode, I hang out with the sweetest bakers around and take a deep dive into their signature bakes. I'm so excited to welcome back someone very special today, Joanne Chang. Joanne has been on the pod before, and her episode remains one of our top episodes. Folks just can't get enough of her sticky buns, which we talked about last time. Joanne is an award-winning pastry chef and the founder of Flour Bakery and Cafe, which now has 9 locations in Boston and Cambridge. I am originally from Boston, and I have been loving on Flour's baked goods for forever. Joanne is also the co-founder of Myers Chang, an Asian fusion restaurant in Boston's South End. Joanne has also written cookbooks, including Flour, Flour 2, Baking with Less Sugar, and Pastry Love. And she has a new one in the works all about cookies. Yum. Joanne and I talk about her incredible career and about her lifelong love of sweets, despite not really indulging in them all that much when she was growing up, except when at her friends' houses. Then she walks me through a few new menu items that are hitting some of the Flour locations soon, including a milk and honey pound cake inspired by honey butter toast, and the Embrace Chai morning bun, an individual babka that honors Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. I loved chatting with Joanne again, and I cannot wait for you to hear our convo, so stay tuned. Cherry Bombe's newest issue, The Power Issue, is out now. We have 4 different covers for this issue, and you won't believe our cover stars. Activist and author Gloria Steinem, Chef Mashama Bailey of The Gray in Savannah, Chef Restaurateurs Jody Williams and Rita Sodi behind Via Carota and More in New York City, and Chef and Culinary Creative Sophia Rowe. If you're a subscriber to Cherry Bombe Magazine, you'll receive your issue very soon. If you're not a subscriber yet, head to cherrybombe.com and sign up today to receive this issue. Or stop by your local culinary shop or bookstore to pick up a copy. Let's chat with today's guest. Joanne, so excited to have you back on She's My Cherry Pie and to talk with you about your incredible career, your milk and honey pound cake, and so much more.
I am thrilled to be back.
So you were brought up in a traditional Taiwanese household and rarely indulged in sweets. Despite their absence, you have adored sweets since you were a little girl. Can you tell us about that, like your love of desserts and sweets, despite really never being exposed to them at home?
I think that's why I fell in love with sweets, because I was not allowed them. You know how when you tell somebody, don't do that, when you tell a little kid, don't touch the stove, the first thing they want to do is touch the stove. And I think my parents were like, don't eat sweets. And so then I was so curious, like, really? How come? Why not? As a young girl, I just became obsessed with sweets. I wasn't allowed them. Every now and then I would get a little taste of this or that. But I would go grocery shopping with my mom, and she would go and get the groceries, and I would just go to the packaged cookie aisle, and then I would go to the bakery section, and I would stand there and just salivate over all of the beautiful things that I saw that I would never be allowed to eat. It was kind of nursing this obsession that I had with sweets that when I finally became old enough to play around in the kitchen, that was the first thing I started doing, is I wanted to make chocolate chip cookies, the Toll House chocolate chip cookies from the yellow bag. And that became like my signature at home was, you know, if mom was in a good mood, she would get that yellow bag and then I would whip up cookies for me and my family.
I loved reading also that, I think it's in your first book, but you say in the head note to your chocolate chip cookie recipe, hey, this is still based on that yellow bag Toll House recipe because it's a classic for, I mean, of course you tweaked it,
yeah,
but it's a classic for a reason.
Right. Why reinvent the wheel? No, we started with that for the Flour Bakery chocolate chip cookie. We improved it by adding better chocolate. And then there's 3 types of different chocolate. We also added a little bit more salt, and we added some high gluten flour or bread flour instead of all-purpose, which gives it just a little bit more heft. So some minor tweaks to make it even better than the original. But yeah, the original Toll House, I think many of us grew up with it. It's hard to beat.
So despite your longing for sweets that were absent in your childhood home, you have described your family as a food-centric Taiwanese family.
Oh, yes.
Thinking about lunch at breakfast
yes.
and thinking about dinner at lunch. Tell us about, like, some of the favorite things that you guys were all thinking about when you were thinking about the next meal.
So my dad does not cook. My mom was a good cook. I think for us, she was a great cook because we grew up with her food, like me and my brother and then my dad. So I always think of her as having been a really, really awesome cook. But the funny thing is the older I got and the more I talked to her sister and her brothers and our relatives, she was not known in the family as being really good in the kitchen. And so it's funny, she came over from Taiwan for graduate school and learned how to cook so that she could make dinner for dad and then eventually me and my brother. And she developed recipes that her sister taught her when she would go back to visit in Taiwan, but she didn't grow up cooking as a kid. She took a lot of recipes from my aunt, her sister, and then has passed those along to me.
So you really, in some ways, besides when you were in the grocery store looking into the bakery case or the cookie aisle, you were also introduced to sweets at your friends' houses.
Yes.
Like all these delicious store-bought, yummy
Yeah.
treats that you weren't allowed. And I love that some of those treats have actually made their way onto the flower
Yeah.
menu, like Oreos. And I don't know if you always have the Hostess cupcakes or if that's just a recipe in one of the books, but just like different yummy treats that you had when you were little visiting friends that you were like, this is nostalgic for me.
Right, right. I mean, my first taste of an actual sweet, I still remember this so vividly. Linda was my best friend who lived next door to me, and I was 7 or 8. She invited me to dinner. At the end of dinner, I was like, "Okay, we're done. We're gonna go play." But Linda just kept sitting there, and I was like, "What are we doing?" And then her mom came out with slices of chocolate cake, and I thought,
Oh
"What is
my.
this?" I took a bite, and I went home, and I was like, "Mom, what is this thing that everybody else gets to eat? How come we don't get to eat this?" And so from Linda and then my other friends, I learned about I remember Pop-Tarts. Oh my gosh,
Oh
the
my
the
gosh.
little pouch, and it was silver, and you'd break into it, and there'd be, like, different colors inside, and I just thought it was magic. I really did.
I feel like when you're little, there is something special about other people's food.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you're always like, "Oh my gosh, they get."
Yeah.
I remember Elio my friend was at Elio's Pizza and Pepperidge Farm cookies. Like, my
What
mind
are all
was
these
blown.
things? Yeah. Well, it's
Exactly.
it's funny at that dinner, Linda's mom served us dinner, and I remember it was a very traditional. I think they were Irish, and it was like a meatloaf and potatoes and peas. It was just very standard fare for them. But I remember her serving it, and I just kinda sat there, and her mom was like, "Joanne, are you okay? Do you need anything else?" And I said, "Where's the rice?" And she just
Oh.
laughed. She's like, "We don't have rice." And I was like, "But you have to have rice." And then she
Oh
said
my
to me,
gosh.
I mean, again, I was 6 or 7. She said, "Do you eat Chinese food all the time?" And I looked at her, I said, "No, I eat regular food." Because to me, the Chinese food that I'd eaten, that was regular food. What they were eating was, like, the weird food.
Besides being in your friend's home and getting inspired by sweets there, you weren't making a lot of things maybe until you were older and
Right.
tasting them. You were dreaming about them.
Yes.
But before college, had you started to kind of enter the kitchen and bake things for your family and
No, not a lot of baking. I mean, before college, I helped my mom make dinner. She was working and, she and my dad would be at work and I would get home from school and she would always leave me instructions on, how to get something started. And so I was always really comfortable in the kitchen. I loved helping. I loved making the beginning part of dinner so that when she came home, she could just finish it off. But I didn't do a lot of experimentation with baking in college. I was mostly focused on my studies and then
yep.
making the Toll House chocolate chip cookie recipe for my friends.
Didn't you have your first like cookie baking job at Leverett House
Yes, in
Grill?
Leverett House.
Yeah.
So Leverett
Yeah.
House was the big dormitory that I lived in, and at the basement of Leverett House was a student-run grill where you come, get hot dogs and hamburgers and fries and all that. And the guys who ran it were sweet mates of mine, and they knew about my cookies because I would make them all the time. And they said, "Will you sell us your cookies? And we will sell them at the grill." And so I did. I still remember I sold them for 25 cents each, and then they sold them to the students for 3 for a dollar. And every semester, I made about $80. I remember I would lug all of the ingredients from the local grocery store back to the dormitory kitchen, which was, I mean, it was a tiny little closet of a kitchen, but I would make these cookies and then bring them to the grill. And then I would get my cash. And by the end of the semester, I usually had about $80 in net profit.
Oh my gosh. We'll be right back. Peeps, did you know that we have a free She's My Cherry Pie newsletter that coincides with each new episode? It comes out every Saturday morning and shares insights about the guest, their recipe, and other fun tidbits and baking news, like our cake of the week. To sign up, head to cherrybomb.substack.com or click the link in our show notes. Have you tuned into Radio Cherry Bombe? It's the flagship podcast from Cherry Bombe, hosted by founder Carrie Diamond. Every Monday, Carrie sits down with the most fascinating folks in food, drink, and hospitality, from icons to rising stars. Don't miss her conversations with Ina Garten, Alice Waters, Padma Lakshmi, the Bears, Liza Colon Zayas, and so many more. Listen to Radio Cherry Bombe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now back to our guest. So after college, you joined the corporate world. You were a consultant, but you spent your salary, your money on cookbooks and
Yes.
kitchen appliances, and it was sort of starting to happen. And I love this. There was this, it's a little bit insider baseball because I grew up in Brookline. I don't know
Okay.
if you know that, but I know you had this pivotal moment where you took Judy Rosenberg's class about
Yes.
opening a restaurant.
Yep.
And Judy Rosenberg had this iconic Boston suburb, I can't remember where it was, bakery called Rosie's
Yes.
that I 100% remember going to or getting baked good from.
Yes. Yeah. She ended up with 3 locations, I think, in the end. But
Yeah.
there was one in Inman Square. That was the original.
You had read Rosie's baking book, which I'd love you to tell us a little bit about,
Yep.
and it inspired you to bake more cookies.
So Judy Rosenberg had this really lovely bakery that I visited, and she had a fun cookbook. And it's so funny to think about how cookbooks have changed over the years, because this cookbook and many cookbooks from that period didn't have pictures. And if you'll remember, it was illustrated with drawings, but it wasn't filled with actual life pictures of the things that you were making. But I remember buying her book, and she offered a class at the Boston Center for Adult Education. This was when I was working as a management consultant, and she offered a class, a 3-hour class called How to Start Your Own Restaurant. I was just kind of thinking about, wow, what a fun idea. It wasn't anything serious. I just thought, oh, this will be so fun. And I took this class, and at the end of it, I stood in line like everybody else to get my book signed, my cookbook signed. And I said to her, I'm a consultant, but I really want to get into the restaurant business. What advice do you have? This is after taking this class where she had basically said the same thing. But she said, the thing you need to do is you need to go work in a restaurant. You need to find out if you really want to open a restaurant first by working in a restaurant. And it sounds so obvious, but at the time I was like, what? Really? And I said, okay, so how am I going to do this? And that's what I did. I decided to look around for a restaurant job. And then I gave notice at the consulting firm. And instead of going to work in a suit, I started going to work in clogs and a chef's coat.
And I love the story of that because at least to me, this seems so ballsy and bold, but you just wrote 4 letters to the 4 top restaurants in Boston.
Yes.
And I remember Biba's well.
Yeah.
Something about those letters. You got a job in one of them.
I found the letters. I was going through some old.
Oh,
Yeah, I still have the letters.
that's
Isn't that crazy?
amazing.
I found the letters. I must have made photocopies. Yeah, I looked up in the Zagat Guide the top restaurants in Boston, and I wrote letters to them all. And I said, I have no professional experience. I have not gone to culinary school, but I'm very passionate about food, and I work really hard, and I will do anything at all that you need in your restaurant. I will do it. Please take a chance on me. And
Yeah.
Lydia Shire from Biba called me the day she got my letter and said, we have an opening if you want to come and interview for it. And I was like, okay. I was at work, and I said, okay. So I told my boss, I said, I got to go do something. And I remember taking a cab down there. She interviewed me. And by the time I got back to my office, she had called and said, you have the job. And I couldn't believe it. And I thought, oh, shoot, I haven't told anybody I'm going to do this. I haven't told my parents I'm going to do this. It was kind of on a lark that I just sent these letters, not thinking anybody would really respond. And within 2 weeks, my whole life changed.
Oh my gosh. How did your parents take the news?
I still remember, I was at a monitor company, the consulting firm. I was all dressed up in my pumps and, my suit. And I remember hanging up the phone with Lydia and thinking, oh, shoot, I got to tell mom and dad. And so I picked up the phone. Dead silence. I mean, when I say dead silence, I thought the phone broke. I didn't know what to do. I was like, hello, hello, hello. Finally, I think mom was like, are you sure about this? And I said, I know that I want to try it out. I don't know what it's going to lead to, but I really am passionate about food and being in the kitchen. I have to give this a shot. I think they heard how desperate I was to at least try it. I didn't plan at that moment, oh my gosh, this is going to be my new career. For me at that moment, I needed to figure out what to do next. What was next wasn't going to be business school. It wasn't going to be more consulting, but I needed to try something else. And so I think they recognized that I just needed to try this. I think honestly, in their heart of hearts, they hoped that I would try it and then come running back to the business world. But that's not exactly what happened.
No, no. When she hired you, it was to be garde-manger?
Exactly, garde-manger.
Yeah. And you kind of bounced around a little with Rialto, and
Yep.
you went to a bakery for a while in West Newton, or
Yes.
Newton, which was also an important stop on your professional journey. It sounds like you learned what was his name? Rick?
Rick Katz, yes.
Yeah, it sounds like you learned so much from him.
I learned everything. I mean, everything. It was a second chance that somebody took on me. I had been working for Lydia for about a year in garde-manger. And in that year, I started to gravitate more towards pastry because the pastry station was right next to my station. So I told Lydia, I said, I've been here a year. I've been doing garde-manger. I don't want to move up on the line. I'd rather work in pastry. And she said, well, I don't have an opening, but my opening pastry chef has gone on to open a bakery of his own, and I think you would learn a lot from him. And so that was Rick Katz in Newton Center. He opened this lovely bakery called Bentonwood Bakery that still inspires me. So many of our recipes are from Bentonwood and from the time there where he just crafted everything with such incredible care. And he really instilled in me that sense of like everything has to be perfect. And, we would stay late just to get the perfect finish on a cake or, the perfect crunch to a cookie. I mean, he was just tireless in trying to achieve this level of perfection that once we got it, we'd both look at each other and be like, oh my gosh, this was so worth it.
When you first opened the first Flour, it was one of the few bake-from-scratch bakeries in town.
I think
What does
so.
that mean exactly? Yeah.
Well, a lot of places you can, there's a couple things you can do. If you go to your local coffee shop and they have pastries, it could be that they've bought them from a bakery. They could buy them from a wholesale bakery. A lot of the places in Boston at the time, that's what they did. The other way you could go is if you were running a coffee shop or a bakery, you can buy muffin mix, you can buy tart shells, you can buy pastry cream mix where you just have to add water and cook it over the stove and then it's done. There's a million ways you can bring a pastry case to life and not have a pastry kitchen in the back. But that's not what we wanted to do. That's not what I was trained to do. I wanted to make every single thing. And so that's what I did, and that's what we still do. Like, we just make everything from scratch. We don't buy croissant dough. We buy butter, and then we pound it and make it into a butter block, and then we mix the croissant base, and then we laminate it, and then we stretch it and roll it and cut it into triangles, proof it, et cetera, et cetera. So we make everything from start to finish because for us, that's the fun. That's the joy part for us in the back, is taking all of these ingredients and then manipulating them in a way so that it creates this flaky, buttery croissant.
Tell us about the name. I didn't know this, but it was almost kind of inspired by a college math class. And what was it? You were asked to rework the number system?
Yes. So the name for Flour Bakery, originally it was just in my head, Joanne's Bakery, which I didn't want to name it Joanne's Bakery, but I needed something just as a placeholder. And I remember calling Christopher and telling him I plan to move back to Boston and I want to open up my own bakery and I need a name. And he's so creative. And so he was tossing around all these really cool ideas. And I kept saying, no, that doesn't seem right. And he said, well, tell me what you're trying to do. And so what you're referring to is in pure math. And this was as a freshman at Harvard. I took a pure math class and totally got smoked. I had no idea what was going on. I found out the first day of pure math class, what you do, or what we did, was you eliminate the number system. There are no numbers. And then you create it from scratch, which don't ask me how to do it because I didn't know what we were doing then, and I still don't know how to do it. But there is this idea in pure math that you start with nothing, and then you have a building block, and then you build, and you build, and you build, and then you create something really beautiful. And so while I didn't understand how to create the number system from my Math 25A class, what I did get from that is that in pastry, isn't that kind of what we do? We start off with just these raw ingredients. And if you look at the ingredient list of any bakery or in any cookbook, it's really incredible how limited the number of ingredients we have that we typically use. And so it's flour, butter, sugar, eggs, and then there's leaveners, and then there's dairy, and then of course you can add nuts and fruit and chocolate, but really it's those like 6 to 8 ingredients that you can either whip together, fold together, knead together, bake together. I mean, there's just so many things you can do, and you create this incredible array of mouthwatering pastries. And so I was telling this to Christopher, like, I really want something that just speaks to the fact that baked goods and pastry are kind of magic. And you just start with flour, butter, sugar, eggs. And depending on how you mix it together, you can get pâte à choux, you can get croissant, you can get scones, you can get cake. And he said, what about flour? And I thought, huh. And it took a while for it to resonate and feel right. But yeah, in the end, I was like, that's it. That's what I want to call my bakery, Flour.
It's such a good, yeah. And I love kind of the branding and the blue and it's flour, and then there's the broken egg.
Exactly.
Everything about it is so brilliant. For those that have not been lucky enough to visit, will you just describe the pastry case, like what we might see if I was lucky enough to be with you right now and was walking over to one of the bakeries after this? What's in the pastry case?
So when you walk in, depending on the bakery, but we have a pastry case, which is a refrigerated case, and then we have a pastry counter. So in the pastry case, you'll see lemon meringue pie, chocolate cream pie, coconut cream pie. Then you'll see triple chocolate mousse cakes, little individual triple chocolate mousse cakes. You'll see sticky bun bread pudding. We have cake truffles. We have coconut and chocolate cake truffles. We have cheesecake. We rotate between a Basque cheesecake, and then sometimes we have a raspberry cheesecake. We have carrot cake. We have a lemon raspberry cake. We have coconut cake, a midnight chocolate cake, and a Boston cream pie. And there's probably a bunch of other things. And then move on to the pastry counter, and that's where you'll see all of the breakfast pastries, all of the cookies, all of the breads, a ton of different breakfast pastries such as muffins. We have seasonal muffins and blueberry muffin. We have scones. We have brioche, sticky buns, cinnamon rolls, croissant, almond croissant. And then we go on to the cookies, chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, ginger molasses, double chocolate. Then we have brownies, bars. We have vegan granola bars. And we have raspberry crumb bars. I mean, it just keeps going and on. And we always have specials. And it makes me so happy every time I walk in there. I walk in and I just look at everything. It's like, oh my gosh, this is happiness.
And every single thing you named, even things I don't normally like, I'm like, yes, I want that. Yes, I want that. Yes. And I'm so glad you have a Basque cheesecake because I don't actually, I know there are a lot of haters out there.
Oh, really?
How not going to like
Basque
this
cheesecake?
I don't like cheesecake, which I know is very controversial, but I love Basque cheesecake. It's so
Jess,
good.
you have to try ours. Oh my gosh,
I
we
know.
worked so hard on it, and it took like, I think it was like 6 or 8 months of just eating cheesecake every week, and this one is...
Oh my gosh, until you got there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm coming in.
Okay.
So tell us about your newest location in the Boston Commons.
Yes.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, we actually just had the ribbon cutting with the mayor, Mayor Wu of Boston. We celebrated our 10th opening of Flower Boston Common. We are in the nation's oldest public park. It's right in the middle of the common. From our location, we can see the dog park where all the dogs are. We can see the tennis courts, the baseball field, the fountain. And right in front of us is the Embrace. It's the statue which commemorates Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott. And it's this beautiful bronze statue. So for this bakery, we created a new pastry called the Embrace, which mimics kind of the bronze color and the intertwining nature of the statue. Yeah, you can't come inside. So it's a little bit different from our other bakeries in that it's more of like a big kiosk. We do all of the cooking and baking inside, but there's no room for guests. But we have a beautiful outdoor patio so you can hang out outside.
I love it. And even in the rain, can you come with your umbrella and you just won't sit, but you'll take something to go?
Yes.
I can't wait to visit.
Yeah, we have soft serve, which is only at this location. We also offer hot dogs, which is only in this location. We worked on a milk bread bun that we make in-house. And then we have a little chili. We have the flour dog. So it's got chili and celery salt and onions and homemade relish.
Before we start talking about the milk and honey pound cake, and also we're going to talk a little bit more about the Embrace, just tell us a little bit. I have heard a rumor that there might be a new book.
Oh, yes. I am working on a cookbook called The Joy of Cookies. So this started a couple years ago, actually. I was talking to my book agent, and she said, do you think you have another one in you? And we've been playing around. Cookies are just, honestly, when you're at home and you want to bake, cookies are the easiest thing. I love making cakes. I love making croissant. I love all of those things, pies, all of those things. For the quickest reward, making cookies is the way to go. And so when she came at me and said, do you have another book in you? I thought, gosh, I have these awesome cookie recipes that I've been playing with at home. It'd be fun to kind of collect all these together and to pull some iconic recipes from the first book, which at this point is, I think, 15 years old. And so there's some really great recipes in there that people have been baking from for the last decade and a half. And so pull them together into this book. And so this is hopefully going to come out next fall of 26.
I love it. One of my favorite cookies is the chocolate hazelnut
That's in
cookie
there.
from the first book.
Yes.
So good. I also love the photograph of the cookies.
Oh, good.
You want to, sometimes there's the photograph. The name would have pulled me in anyway because I do love chocolate and hazelnut, but also I love that photograph. So it'll be kind of a collection of your own stuff, maybe
Correct.
some from the book, some stuff from the bakery now.
Yes, it's stuff from the bakery now. It's stuff from past books. And also a really fun part of this is I thought so much of pastry is sharing, not just sharing of baked goods and wonderful treats, but it's also sharing of recipes. All of the pastry chefs I know, if I'm interested in something that they make, all I have to do is pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I had this incredible pastry at your place. Do you mind sharing the recipe? And I've never had anybody say no. And I think we all really respect each other and we would never take advantage of that. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fun to include cookie recipes from my favorite pastry chefs, from the pastry chefs that I've been lucky enough to get to know over the last many years of being a pastry chef. And so I reached out to, I think it's 6 or 7 of them. And like I said, nobody said no. Everybody said, I'd love to share a cookie recipe. And so I have part of the book is my favorite pastry chefs sharing with me and then me to you all of their favorite cookie recipes.
Oh, I love that. All right. So the last time we chatted, I was lucky enough to talk to you about, or we did a deep dive into your recipe for Flour's famous sticky buns. And this time we're going to talk about 2 new recipes that you're launching soon. One that will be in the Boston Commons that we talked about a teeny bit, and then the other one that will be in all the locations.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is this milk and honey pound cake. Can I just say that there is something about the name that makes you want to eat it? It's sort of based on like a honey butter toast.
Yes.
And why have I been sleeping on honey butter toast? Like, I don't even know about honey butter toast.
People always ask, where do you get your ideas from? It's traveling, it's reading books, it's reading magazines. But lately, I feel like the last 3 or 4 years, it's probably longer than that, it's Instagram. I go on Instagram and just my feed is all the different pastries that different people are doing across the world. And honey butter toast started to float onto my feed maybe a year or 2 ago. And it's just this super thick piece of toast that has been fried in honey and butter. And it's caramelized on the outside and it just looks so good. It looks a little bit like the creme brulee version of toast. And the toast inside, when you watch somebody eating it. Jessie, I've never eaten it. I've seen it a gazillion times on Instagram, but I have never been able to eat it. And so I said to my team, we have this incredible pastry chef, Steven, and I said, hey, let's do something like this. Now, it's a challenge for us in 10 bakeries to try to do one thing that's made to order consistently. And so we tried to do something that we could offer at the bakeries that was exactly like honey butter toast that I'd seen on Instagram, but it would be really challenging logistically. So what Steven did was he came up with this milk and honey pound cake recipe, which has all the flavors of honey butter toast, but instead it's in a pound cake. And it is incredible. Gosh, I wish I could just zap this through the microphone to you so that you could taste it. Did you grow up with Sara Lee pound cake?
Of course.
Everybody,
Totally.
right? Everybody.
Yeah.
And you take it and you slice it thin and then you toast it. I used to do that all the time. That velvet crumb, for me, it's what I'm always trying to mimic when I'm baking, when I'm doing a pound cake. And so this pound cake does that. It's got this melt in your mouth. It's dense but light at the same time. It's pastry magic.
Oh my gosh.
And then the flavor, it's buttery, it's creamy, it's got so much vanilla. It's got a lot of honey. I mean, this is the epitome of the simple thing. It doesn't have a lot of ingredients, but the way in which they're all combined, I mean, the honey is reduced and reduced and reduced with some buttermilk to make a syrup that's then poured on top. When you're eating it, it's super velvety, but then you get these hits of vanilla and then a little cream and then a little butter and then a little sugar and then a little more cream. And it just keeps going and going. And I mean, it's, quote, just a pound cake, but it is incredible.
Oh my gosh. All right, first things first, we're going to preheat our oven to, it said 325 in the recipe I saw, but is that convection? So if
We do
someone was
convection,
making this at
exactly.
home,
I would
it
do
would
it.
be 350.
Correct.
Yeah. So if you're at home and you were making this, you would
Yes.
preheat the oven to 350, and then we're going to spray a loaf pan. Is there no paper? You guys just do the spray
We do the
and no
spray,
paper?
but I mean, at home you could definitely do paper. We used to do paper, and it was very time consuming. And we found that if we
Yeah.
just spray, it's so much quicker. Like we're doing dozens at a time, and so it was a time saving thing.
Are you guys like an 8.5 by 4 inch pound cake person? Is it a 9 by 5 inch
I think it's a 9 by 5. It's a very
Yep.
classic loaf pan.
size? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we'll melt some butter. I assume unsalted butter?
Unsalted, always unsalted. Yes.
We'll melt some unsalted butter with some honey. Is there a favorite brand or a favorite flavor?
We actually just use a very neutral honey. It's not a specific brand or flavor. This is what I love about baking is that if you're making this, I encourage you to make it just like we do, and then make it again and make it your own. And so if there's a certain type of honey that you like, if you like that flavor, then you can add it at this point.
So we have our honey, our unsalted butter, and vanilla paste. Is there a brand that you guys love of vanilla paste?
We've been using a brand called Prova. I love Madagascar beans. And so if you don't have paste, you can use extract. You can use actually the real beans if you have that. That would give you the most intense vanilla flavor.
So we have the paste, we have the honey, the butter. We're going to melt them together. Would it be like over medium heat in like
Exactly.
a small saucepan kind
Exactly.
of situation?
Yes.
Melt that, set aside. Then we're going to whisk some eggs, some heavy cream, sugar, I'm assuming granulated?
Yes, exactly.
And granulated sugar in a stand mixer bowl on like speed 3, which is maybe like a medium?
It's a medium. Yeah, for us.
home
Well,
cook?
actually, speed 3 is high for us. 'Cause
Oh,
we
it
have-
is?
Yeah,
Okay,
in the
so-
big mixer, it's 1, 2, 3, so it's high.
Okay.
You're trying to really add a lot of volume to the
That's
eggs.
what I was going to ask you. Are we looking for something ribbony?
Yes.
For about 2 minutes. Then we're going to add some all-purpose flour. Is there a brand that you guys love?
We do King Arthur unbleached, unbromated. Yeah.
We're going to add some all-purpose flour, some baking powder, salt. Is salt always kosher at flour?
It's always kosher. And it's funny, now that I'm writing the cookbook, I mean, I've done this for all the other books, but I've been getting more questions about it. I get a lot of bakers who ask, why kosher salt? Salt is salt, right? And it is, but most professional pastry chefs use kosher salt because most professional kitchens, they use kosher salt, because it's much easier to measure. It's much cleaner. And I think if you use like table salt, like iodized table salt, as you know, it's like super, super fine. And so it's really easy to overuse and overmeasure. And the flavor isn't quite as clean.
Yeah, we always have kosher salt to cook with in
Right.
home kitchens, I feel like. Why not always?
Exactly.
I always now write recipes for kosher salt. So we're adding the all-purpose flour, the baking powder, and the salt, and continuing to mix until smooth, scraping once or twice.
Yep,
I
always.
assume with a flexible spatula.
Exactly.
Are you guys using a huge Hobart? So
Yeah,
are you...
we're using a huge one that you can sit in. So,
Oh my God.
so when we scrape, we actually take a bowl scraper in our hand. And they have these gloves
Yeah.
that go all the way up to their elbows. And they take the bowl scraper and they go down
Yep.
and then scrape. That's a really important part of all baking that I sometimes see home bakers who skip this step because they just think, oh, it's not that
Yeah.
important. But it's so important because you really need everything to mix together well. Otherwise, you end up with little pockets of whether it's butter or sugar or flour. And then when you're baking, those little pockets end up being chewy or dense or definitely not what you want.
I remember in my first and only bakery job being taught about the nipple at the bottom of the Hobart bowl, because I was like, what do you
Right.
mean nipple? And like you had to get
It's
in there
true.
and like make sure things weren't stuck around the nipple. But I still think about that when I'm just at home with my own little tiny stand mixer. Then we're going to stream in the butter and the honey and the vanilla mixture that we melted. Should it be cooled or can it still be warm?
It can be warm, but you don't want it to be hot. And you're going to
Right.
stream it in because you're trying to emulsify the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so if you stream it in as the mixture's going, then slowly, it should all combine really smoothly.
Yep. And this is speed 2, so we've dropped it a little. Maybe now
Exactly.
we're at medium.
It's more like medium. Yeah.
And we're going to just mix until smooth, and we're scraping a lot.
Yep.
I thought this was sort of interesting. It seems a little unusual to me to sort of be adding the fat last. The butter, I just think of like a recipe like have your melted butter with your
Right.
sugar in the beginning. And this is like a little bit unusual.
So funny. A lot of our recipes are like this. Our banana bread is like this
Ah.
too. And our carrot cake is
Interesting.
like this, where you whip up the sugar and the eggs and you really get a lot of volume. And then you
Ah,
emulsify the fat into it. So it's a
that's
way,
so
especially with a
interesting.
liquid fat, whether it's oil or melted butter. If you think about it,
Yeah.
when you have firm butter, you can whip with the sugar, and then you're aerating the butter and you're creating lots of air pockets with that sugar, which is really coarse. But when you have
Yeah.
melted butter or oil, there's no opportunity to create air pockets, air bubbles. And you need those air bubbles because as soon
Yeah.
as you go into the oven, whatever liquid is in your recipe is taking all of those air bubbles and the liquid is turning into steam. And then the steam makes the air bubbles just a little bit bigger. And that's what causes a cake to be nice and fluffy or a cookie to rise. And so when you
Yeah.
have oil, olive oil, or melted butter, you can't do that with the sugar. And so what you do instead is you aerate the eggs and the sugar, and that will create big bubbles in the egg. You're whipping up the eggs and creating all of this air within the egg. And then
Well,
you add the fat.
you just blew my mind because I love to develop recipes with oil and melted butter only because I love to make things easy for people and I
Right.
don't want them to have to use a stand mixer. And I
Absolutely.
love this idea that the
Yeah.
first step, why don't I just do my sugar and my eggs and
Yes.
add that melt? Oh my God.
Ah!
I'm so excited. I can't wait to try
I
that.
can't wait for you to try it.
Okay, so we've streamed it in. We now understand why the butter's coming last, and we're going to transfer the mixture to our prepared loaf pan.
Yes.
We're going to bake for about 50 to 55 minutes. And how are you guys testing? I always like a moist crumb. Are your people doing moist crumbs, or is it just visual and smell?
It's by touch. So this is probably for dozens of cakes at a time. And so in your
Yep.
home oven, it might not take a full 55 minutes, but they test by literally pulling the cakes out of the oven and then taking their fingers and touching the center of the middle
Yep.
of all the cakes.
Yep.
And if it resists, then the batter has turned into a baked batter, and then you're good and you can remove it.
Yep.
If when you press, you feel your fingers kind of depressing into the center of the cake, then you know that there's still batter that's raw in the middle and you got to keep cooking it.
Yeah.
And another way is just visually, you just get
Yeah.
started to get that golden crumb. And then another way, and this is less so with a loaf pan, but more so in a circular pan, as soon as the batter starts to pull away from the sides of the pan, then your cake is done. Because at
Yep.
that point, the starch has set, and that's why it's kind of pulling away. It's like, okay, I'm done. And so then you
Yep.
can pull your cakes out.
Well, the cake is baking. We're going to make our honey butter soak, which I
Yes.
love. I mean, it's obviously because you're a genius. Of course, you're doing this, but I love that when trying to pop flavors, like
Yeah.
when just trying to make things moist, take an ingredient that was baked in
Yes.
and turn it into a glaze or turn it into a soak. So this is a honey butter soak. We're going to heat unsalted butter again, along with some honey, that same type that we used in
Correct.
the loaf, until it boils. And then we will cool that down with buttermilk. So are we taking it off the heat
Yes.
and then adding the buttermilk?
Exactly.
Does it curdle?
No, and well, you're actually gonna boil that honey and that butter so that it kind of caramelizes a little bit.
Ah, so it's
So it like
thicker.
thickens, yes.
Yeah.
And then when you add the buttermilk, you whisk it in, and then it's sort of like an emulsification. You whisk it, and it all
Yeah.
comes together. This is something that I love to do. I love to repeat flavors and kind of emphasize flavors and highlight flavors. And this was Stephen, our pastry chef, it was his genius idea when he was coming up with this bread. We tasted it, and we're like, this is good. It's good. And I'm always looking at him like, but is it great? And so
Yeah.
he came back and he was like, okay, I made it great. I made this honey butter soak mixture to really
Yeah.
emphasize all the flavors. And it really did make something that was good and turn it into great.
I also think there's a little bit of genius here, too, with the buttermilk, because it could have been cream or it could have
Right.
been milk.
Yep.
But I assume that tang of the buttermilk
exactly.
is just brightening everything.
Exactly. Especially with honey. And it can be such a one note flavor that you
Yeah.
need something a little bright.
I also wondered about the lemon juice, because there's some lemon juice, too. Is that the same thing to kind of pop the honey flavor in a more interesting way?
Exactly. We had it
Yeah.
without the lemon juice and we kept saying, this is great, but man, it needs just a little brightness. And so Stephen continued to increase the buttermilk. And then it got to a point where I was like, we're not going to get there with buttermilk. And so
Yeah.
he said, let's try some lemon. So we threw in some lemon and that really woke it up.
I love it. So we're going to brush that on when the cake is still warm and when the soak is warm.
Yes.
And then sort of as long as you can resist,
Yeah.
wait for it to sort of do its thing. If
Yeah.
you can't resist, you're our
I
people.
understand.
We get it. And then just quickly before we sadly say goodbye, tell us a little bit more about that Embrace morning bun that you mentioned before. That I love that it kind of is a nod to the environment that
Yes.
the Commons, the new flower spot, is located.
It was actually Christopher's idea. We were standing at Flower Boston Common looking at the Embrace statue, and he said, wouldn't it be amazing if we made a pastry that looked like that? And we can donate the proceeds to the Boston Foundation, which is the organization that's built and maintains the Embrace. So Stephen and I got to work, and we said, we had so many ideas. It was going to be a pretzel. We were going to do something with, cookies. And we had been making these large format babkas, like in a loaf pan. And he thought, I wonder if we can do this individual style. And so that's exactly what he did, is he took the babka dough, which is essentially a brioche dough. He brushed it with brown butter, and then we filled it with chai spices. And then you'd braid it into an individual little ball and plop it into a muffin tin, and then proof it and bake it. And then we roll it around in butter. When it comes out of the oven, we roll it around in butter and then into a sugar mixture that has all of the chai spices again. So it's a chai spice morning bun that we call the Embrace.
Oh my God, a chai spice.
It's so
I
good.
also loved, just for the listeners to understand, it's again using what you put into the baked good
Right.
on the outside of the
Yes.
baked good to again kind of just accentuate all of that.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Joanne. And I just want to say that you are my cherry pie.
Oh, thanks. You are mine. Thank you.
That's it for today's show. Don't forget to follow She's My Cherry Pie on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And tell your pals about us. She's My Cherry Pie is a production of the Cherry Bombe Podcast Network. Thank you to City Vox Studio in Manhattan. Our producers are Carrie Diamond, Catherine Baker, and Jenna Sadu. Thank you so much for listening to She's My Cherry Pie, and happy baking!